In today's tutorial, we're going to talk about how the core really works, because there are large sections, or there is a large section of the health and fitness industry that still thinks that sit-ups, crunches, side bends, and these types of exercises are useful exercises. What we're going to do is we're going to look at the core, we're going to look at its function, because if we can understand its function, how we train it, how we use exercises, and the types of exercises that we use becomes very simple to understand. And then that, in a sense, forms the training that we do. So to start with, we'll look at the core muscles, and then essentially we'll be able to tell where the core is. So we've got rectus abdominis, here and here. Internal, external obliques, which are here. Transverse abdominis, which sits underneath that. Quadratus lumborum, if you've got the pelvis here, you've got the spine, you've got the rib cage, you've got QL, which comes down off the rib cage, attaches onto the spine, and essentially stabilizes the pelvis to the ribs. You've got the diaphragm that sits in here. You've got the pelvic floor that sits here. You've got the lats. Again, they come down off the back of the arm, join into the thoracolumbar fascia, again stabilizing the lumbar area along with the glutes as well. And then you've got the spinal erectors, again, which are adding stability to the spine, going up the spine. So what we can start to see is that the core is much more than just your abs and your obliques, the abdominal wall. It's essentially the whole space between the hips and the shoulders. So it's this whole, so you could even, if you wanted to, you could add the pecs in there, certainly pec minor, which would be stabilizing the shoulder blade. So we've got all these different muscles that are involved in the core. So from a very simple perspective, we've got a very large area with a lot of muscles. So what we'll do now is we'll start to add a little bit more to that on the next slide. So we've talked about the makeup of the core. We've looked at the muscles. There's lots of them, and they've sort of organized in these different directions. So they're able to stabilize the spine, the pelvis, and the ribs, essentially, which is the whole torso. Now we're going to look at some of the function of that. So why is it all sort of put together like that? Well, as you can see, we've got a diagram here, and the title of the diagram are hoop stresses. And then what we've got are these arrows on the inside and the title or label of internal pressure. Now, we've all heard of intra-abdominal pressure. That's essentially what this is. So it's an internal pressure that's pushing out onto the wall of the torso. Now, not just at the front, but also the sides and the back as well. So it's an internal pressure that's created that's pushing out. And what the muscles are there to do is to resist that pressure. Because if they don't resist that pressure, essentially it will explode. I mean, your abdominals, your torso isn't going to explode. But if the internal pressure was high enough for whatever reason, then that certainly has the possibility of happening. Now, the purpose of the rectus abdominis is there to, again, to resist these hoop stresses. And we all know the six-pack of the abdominals, which is essentially 6 blocks of muscle fibers which are contained within like a fascial wall. Now, it's organised like this to resist those pressures that are pushing out, not to contract and sort of bend the body forward. It can do that, but that's not its primary function. The primary function is to resist these hoop stresses. If it was just muscle all the way down, then it wouldn't be able to resist them as effectively, or it wouldn't be able to resist as high hoop stresses. So when we look at that, what we're starting to understand is we need to start using the torso more as a let's just say a rigid system, and not so rigid that you have to walk around like a robot and you can't bend your spine. That's not what I'm saying. There is a time and there is a place where you can bend your spine, you can flex it, you can twist it, you can extend it, you can side bend it. It's just not as effective doing it when it's loaded. It's more effective to get the movement from the hips and from the shoulders when it's loaded, because those are bigger movement joints with bigger, more powerful muscles around them. So what we then get is a force exerted on the wall of a cylinder. So that's the intra-abdominal pressure pushing out. So all the muscles need to activate together to be able to, in a sense, resist that force. So the torso is holding solid. The arms and the shoulders and the hips are the ones that are creating the movement. Because again, if I grab another slide up and we look at the muscles around there, if we take the hips for example, the hips have got the glutes. They've got as the extenders. They've got the psoas as the flexor. Again, what these muscles are there to do is to create that force. The psoas is to flex the hip and lift the knee. The glutes is to essentially straighten the leg and extend the hip. Now, obviously, the glute max is a very powerful, got a lot of force within it. So that's what that muscle wants to be doing. And that is where the power comes from in the hip extension, not the hip flexion, which is why we've only got a psoas in that place. So all sections are activated together. So what we're starting to understand now is we've got a co-contraction of the core. So we've got a lot of muscles working to hold that cylinder in place to resist the intra-abdominal pressure by creating these hoop stresses. And that is how we want our core to work. So how does that look in movement? So very simply, it's, as you can see here, it's isometric holds. So what we've got here is a side plank which activates QL, TVA, obliques, rectus abdominis. You can get lats in there if you want to. You can get a variety of other muscles. You will get some spinal erectors in there as well. But this is very much the beginning phase of using your core correctly. So all we're doing is we're just looking to hold the torso in a solid position. Now what we can do is then add movement on top of that. But what we want to get first is the co-contraction and the ability to hold the position. Once we've got that ability to hold position, what we can then start to do is start using the shoulders, start using the hips to create movement. But what you'll notice is that my torso is still in that solid position. So what I've not done is I've not sort of twisted my spine at all. I've not flexed my spine. I've not extended my spine. I've still got that natural S curve. I've rotated on this front hip and I've lifted from my shoulder. That's where all the power comes from. But how it's been trained, certainly at the beginning phase with a beginner or someone who's potentially advanced, but they've just never done this type of training before or trained in this way before, is you would start with these isometric holds. So you start here and then you build the movement in. So what this is doing is this is integrating movement and challenging the abdominals at the same time. So it's getting core training, but it's also developing movement patterns and movement force, let's say, from the muscle. Transmits lateral forces across the abdominals. So using the side plank, we've got the sort of the lateral forces going across. Obviously here, we've got more diagonal forces because we're rotating and using, let's just say, opposite sides of the body at the same time. So we've got these different forces. You've got sort of the lateral forces. You've got the diagonal forces. This is where you can then start talking about fascial lines and the spiral line and the deep front line and the superficial front line, deep back line, superficial back line. So you've got all these different lines that are going across the torso. This is where they become integrated because we're using the whole body in the way that it's essentially it's built to do. But what we're doing is we're using isometric holds in short, that should say, intervals to build the endurance, and then we lay down the movement on top. So that's the building blocks of how your core works, from just looking at the muscles and how they're structured to then how the torso manages force. And then when we sort of look at those two together, you can start to see there are certain exercises that are more effective than others, the ineffective ones being the spine bending ones like sit-ups, crunches, back extensions, twists, bends, whatever they may be. So it's very much looking at it from that mechanical perspective or biomechanical perspective, and then building the exercise program from it. And if you want to build your core strength and stability in the way that I'm talking about, then please do just click the link below, go through to my how to build core strength and stability in 12 weeks. So I'll take you from beginners all the way to advanced. When you get to the end of the 12 weeks, you then get about another, I think, 20 workouts which open up at the intermediate and advanced level. So you can then open that up, and then you can choose those workouts. They're equipment based, so they're body weight and equipment based, I should say. So if you've got equipment, you can start using it. So if you want to go from beginner to advanced in 12 weeks, please do click the link below and get started on building your core strength and stability.